Solara is a shimmering testament to light, a floating metropolis where the sun never truly sets and gold-trimmed spires reach toward an eternal azure sky. For citizens above, life is a symphony of radiance. Yet beneath the foundations of this paradise lies the abyss, a subterranean world of shadows where the sunlight is nothing more than a half-forgotten myth. Between these two worlds stands the barrier, a veil of crackling energy that serves as both a shield and a prison. Ren, a high-ranking guardian of Solara, walked the perimeter of this wall with a heavy heart, his armor reflecting the glow of the city he was sworn to protect. His duty was absolute: maintain the energy flow and ensure that no creature from the darkness ever breached the sanctity of the light. He was the embodiment of Solarian law, a warrior trained to view those below as parasites, monsters who would extinguish the sun if given the chance. The air near the barrier always hummed with a vibrating frequency that set Ren's nerves on edge. During a routine patrol near the lower sectors, where the clouds were thin and the darkness felt uncomfortably close, a violent surge of indigo energy erupted from a collapsing rift. Through the distortion, Ren saw a figure, not a monster, but a young woman with hair the color of midnight and eyes that mirrored the pale bioluminescence of the deep. This was Lyra. She was trapped within the collapsing rift, her body convulsing as the Solarian light began to sear her skin. The law was clear: any abyssal caught in the rift was to be executed. But as Ren looked into her terrified eyes, his hand froze on the hilt of his blade. He didn't see an enemy, he saw a soul in agony. Breaking every protocol he had spent a lifetime mastering, Ren reached out with his energy tether and pulled Lyra through the rift just before it imploded, vanishing into the secret shadows of an abandoned sanctuary, a forgotten cathedral that sat in the neutral space between civilizations. Within the silent halls of the sanctuary, the true tragedy of their existence became painfully clear. Solarians and abyssals were not just culturally divided. They were biologically incompatible. Their bodies carried opposing energy polarities that reacted violently to one another. To a Solarian like Ren, the touch of an abyssal was like a searing brand. To Lyra, his proximity felt like standing beside a raging furnace. If they were to touch, the resulting energy surge would cause agonizing internal damage to them both. They were two magnets forced together by fate, but kept apart by the laws of physics. Ren watched her from across the hall, his heart racing with wonder. He provided her with sustenance and hidden warmth, keeping her presence a secret from the council and his fellow guardians, knowing that his compassion was an act of treason against everything he knew. As the days passed, the silence between them began to break. Separated by a thick glass partition within the hall, they began to speak. Lyra told him of the glowing fungi forests of the abyss and the songs her people sang to the cold stars they could never see. Ren spoke of the warmth of the sun and the vastness of the sky. In those conversations, the propaganda they had been fed since birth began to crumble. Ren realized the shadow dwellers were simply people, while Lyra discovered the sun gods were merciful. Their bond grew in the quiet spaces, a connection that defied the hatred of their worlds. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. However, the peace of their sanctuary was not meant to last. In the High Command Center of Solara, General Kale stood before a wall of monitors, narrowing his eyes at unexplained energy fluctuations. Ren had always been his trusted subordinate, but the general noticed a shift in the young guardian's focus. Ren's energy signature was becoming erratic, tainted by something unfamiliar that the senses couldn't quite identify. Suspicion, sharp and cold, took root in Kale's mind. Silently, the general deployed a stealth surveillance drone, programming it to follow Ren's movement. As Ren prepared to return to the sanctuary with a gift for Lyra, he remained unaware of the mechanical eye tracking him from the clouds, a silent harbinger of the storm that was about to break over both their worlds. The surveillance drone hovered like a silent predator in the high rafters of the sanctuary, its cold mechanical lens capturing every moment of the forbidden meetings. Inside the hall, Ren and Lyra remained oblivious to the doom gathering above their heads. Their world had shrunk to the dimensions of this hidden sanctuary, where the light of Solara met the shadows of the abyss in a soft twilight dance. Ren spoke of the wind, how it felt like an invisible hand brushing against the tall grass of the upper plains, and Lyra described the rhythmic pulsing of the deep sea-like caves, a heavy velvet quiet that felt like a mother's embrace. Their love blossomed in the cracks of a broken world, defying the very laws of their existence. Despite the physical barrier and the biological poison of their proximity, they felt a pull stronger than gravity. They were two halves of a shattered whole, yearning to bridge a gap that the universe itself had declared impossible. The propaganda of their childhoods had been replaced by a shared language of sighs and longing looks, creating a fragile peace that felt more real than the inevitable war brewing outside their doors. But longing eventually turned into a desperate, reckless hunger for touch. One evening, driven by a loneliness that burned hotter than the Solarian sun, Ren placed his palm against the glass, right where Lyra's hand rested on the other side. The barrier felt too cold, too thick. With a surge of his internal light, Ren forced a hairline fracture into the reinforced pain. Lyra gasped, her pale eyes wide with both terror and desire, but she didn't pull away. As their fingertips finally met through the sliver of open air, the world seemed to scream in protest. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. A catastrophic surge of discordant energy erupted. A blinding flash of gold and violet that threw them both across the room with bone-shattering force. Ren's arm was scorched, the skin blackened and crackling with a lingering, erratic static that made his muscles seize in agony. Lyra lay crumpled against the far wall, her breathing shallow and her essence dimmed, as if the contact had drained the very life from her core. The physical pain was immense, but the emotional realization was far worse. Their love was a weapon directed at each other. It was in this moment of devastating vulnerability that the sanctuary was no longer a secret. Sora, Ren's closest friend and a fellow guardian, stepped from the shadows of the arched doorway. He had followed the surveillance data, but seeing the reality was a blow he was not prepared for. He looked at Ren's charred arm, and then at the abyssal girl shivering on the floor, and his heart hardened with a misguided sense of protection. To Sora, this wasn't love. It was a parasitic infection. He believed the Shadow Dweller was corrupting Ren, feeding off his light like a lamprey in the dark. Ren begged for silence, his voice hoarse with agony, but Sora saw only a friend who was drowning in a sea of treason. Meanwhile, the political climate in Solara reached a boiling point. The abyssal raids for resources had intensified, and the Solarian Council had authorized the activation of the purification weapon. It was a device designed to flood the lower depths with a concentrated burst of solar radiation, effectively erasing the Shadow Dwellers from existence. General Kale was already preparing the Great Spire for the final countdown, his eyes fixed on the total eradication of the darkness below. Sora's loyalty finally snapped under the weight of his fear for Ren's soul. Believing he was saving his friend's life, he went to General Kale and revealed the location of the sanctuary. He told himself that once the girl was gone, Ren would return to the man he used to be. While Ren was away, scouring the lower city's medical bays for an experimental salve to heal Lyra's energy-burned skin, the Solarian forces struck. They didn't come for a parley, they came for a harvest. When Ren finally returned to the sanctuary, his heart sank into his stomach. The beautiful stained glass was shattered into thousands of jagged diamonds, the ancient tapestries were torn to shreds, and the air smelled of ozone and cold, clinical iron. Lyra was gone, and the silence that remained was louder than any scream. Before he could even process the grief, every broadcast screen in the city flickered to life. General Kale's cold, triumphant face filled the sky, his voice echoing across the golden streets with chilling authority. He announced that the purification weapon was ready, but it lacked a stable catalyst to bridge the energy gap. To jumpstart the genocide, they had captured an abyssal with unique resilience. Lyra was to be used as the battery, her very life force drained to power the machine that would destroy her world. Ren did not wait for permission or mercy. He moved through the arterial conduits of Solara like a ghost, his knowledge of the city's secret infrastructure serving as his only map. Every alarm in the floating city wailed in a dissonant chorus, but he ignored the red strobe lights reflecting off his armor. His heart was a drum of desperate resolve, beating only for the girl who was being turned into a living battery. He bypassed the main security gates, sliding through maintenance hatches until the great spire loomed before him, a terrifying monolith of gleaming chrome and humming power. Inside the central chamber, the air was thick with the smell of scorched ozone and the sickening vibration of the purification weapon. Lyra was suspended in a cage of light, her body arching in agony as the machine began to siphon her essence. General Kale stood at the console, watching the energy levels climb toward the point of no return. When Ren burst into the room, his charred arm pulsing with a dark, erratic rhythm, the general didn't look surprised. He turned slowly, drawing his ceremonial blade, which shimmered with pure solar energy. Kyle spoke of duty and the preservation of their species, but Ren no longer heard the words. To Ren, the general represented a world built on the lie of superiority. The fight was brutal and fast. Kyle's strikes were precise, fueled by the pristine light of Solara, but Ren had something the general could not calculate. The impurity from his contact with Lyra, the dark energy of the abyss, had integrated into his very cells. With a roar of defiance, Ren channeled this hybrid power, a swirling vortex of shadow and sun, shattering Kale's golden shields. The general was thrown back by the sheer paradox of the force, his weapon clattering across the floor as he watched his perfect world crumble in the face of a forbidden union. Ren didn't finish him. He didn't have time. He raced to the machine's core, where the energy was reaching a supercritical state. The only way to stop the discharge was to manually reverse the energy polarity, a task that would force the lethal, concentrated abyssal energy directly through his own body. Ren didn't hesitate. As he gripped the release levers, the scream that tore from his throat was lost in the roar of the machine. His veins turned black as the shadow energy flooded his system, warring with the light of his own soul. He managed to uncouple the restraints, and Lyra tumbled from the machine into his arms. They were both dying, their bodies failing under the weight of the cosmic imbalance they had triggered. The core was still pulsing, a ticking bomb that would not just erase the abyss, but shatter the foundation of Solara itself. "We have to neutralize it," Lyra whispered, her voice a fragile thread. She looked at the core, and then at Ren's hands. They knew the cost. To stabilize the energy, they had to act as a bridge, a final conduit to ground the warring forces. In their final moments, they did what they had been told was impossible. They reached out and locked their fingers together. This time, there was no glass and no hesitation. The pain was an ocean of fire, an agony that transcended the physical, but beneath it was a peace they had never known. Their energies, shadow and light, swirled around them in a blinding violet-gold nebula. Their forms began to dissolve, their individual identities melting into a singular radiant consciousness that eclipsed the room. A massive shockwave erupted from the spire, but it wasn't a wave of destruction, it was a wave of truth. The barrier that had separated the floating city from the subterranean world for centuries shattered like thin ice under a spring sun. For the first time in history, the people of Solara looked down to see the beauty of the deep, and the dwellers of the abyss looked up to see the infinite sky. The propaganda of monsters and gods evaporated in the light of a shared sunrise. Years later, a memorial was erected where the great spire once stood. It was not a monument to war, but to the two lovers who had chosen each other over their worlds. In the cracks of the stone, a single flower began to bloom, a blossom with petals that shimmered like gold in the day and glowed like violet bioluminescence in the night. It was a living testament to Ren and Lyra, a love that was never meant to exist, yet became the very thing that saved them all.